My name is Marcus Webb, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest problem was whether to finally replace the sputtering air conditioner in my Chicago apartment that made grinding noises every time it cycled on. I was 28, working nights as a systems tech and dispatcher at the Harrow County Emergency Coordination Center, and my world revolved around keeping the town's emergency alert systems running smoothly. My uniform was simple: a black hoodie with a faded security logo from my previous job, dark jeans and steel-toe work boots that had seen better days but were still comfortable for 12-hour shifts. I'd moved to Harrow's Run to escape the noise and chaos of city life, looking for something quiet and predictable. Harrow's Run is the kind of nowhere town that exists in the gaps between places people actually want to visit. Population 3,847 on a good day, tucked in a valley in eastern Washington where cell service dies and GPS gets confused. One main street, 3 churches, a high school that looks frozen in 1975, and a water tower with peeling paint that reads Harrow's Run. Our time is now in faded blue letters. That slogan would end up being more prophetic than anyone intended. The Emergency Coordination Center sits half-buried on the north edge of town, a concrete bunker designed to survive everything from tornadoes to nuclear fallout. My job was straightforward: monitor camera feeds from traffic intersections, keep an eye on county emergency radio channels, and maintain the integrated public alert and warning system that could push emergency messages to every phone, TV, and radio in the county. When your phone screams with an amber alert or weather warning, I'm the guy who makes sure the system doesn't fail when people need it most. The building itself is windowless and sterile, humming with servers and climate control systems. My console consists of 6 monitors showing camera feeds, network health dashboards, NOAA weather data, IPAWS controls, and a county map dotted with icons I can click for details. Night shifts are usually dead quiet, maybe a drunk driver, occasionally a domestic dispute, but mostly just me, my thermos of coffee, and the steady tick of synchronized clocks throughout the facility. The weird stuff started with those clocks. My setup is saturated with time sources: NTP servers, GPS atomic sync, NOAA time feeds, all cross-referencing each other. They're designed never to drift by more than milliseconds. So when I noticed a half-second discrepancy during my routine check 3 weeks ago, it felt like discovering gravity had stopped working properly. The wall clock showed 01, 12, 30. My primary NTP readout showed 01, 12, 29, 5. My phone showed 1, 12, 31. The GPS receiver blinked yellow instead of its usual green for several seconds before correcting itself. Half a second isn't apocalyptic, so I logged it as a glitch and moved on. The next night, it was 2 seconds, then 5. Then I started getting error messages from devices that had no business disagreeing with each other. Time source out of tolerance, NTP stratum anomaly, GPS fix unstable. I mentioned it to my supervisor, Hal Morrison, during shift change. Hal's ex-Air Force runs on black coffee and cynical one-liners, and he gave me that look old techs give younger ones when they think you're overthinking things. Solar flare, maybe, he said. Space weather screws with satellites. Keep monitoring it, Webb. If something explodes, call me. Nothing exploded, but time started wobbling. That's the only way I can describe it. Camera feeds would freeze for what felt like 10 seconds, but timestamps jumped by 1. A car would appear halfway through an intersection between frames, like reality had skipped forward. During breaks, I'd glance at my phone for what seemed like minutes, then find 20 had passed on the console clock. I started doing sanity checks, setting 60-second timers and comparing them across different devices. Sometimes they matched perfectly. Sometimes one would be 5 seconds ahead, then slowly drift back into alignment on its own. I thought I was losing my mind until the town started noticing. A farmer called complaining his drive to work took 40 minutes instead of 15 with no traffic. A high school kid posted online that last period felt like 5 minutes even though the clock showed 45 had passed. That's when the federal directive arrived. DHS header, routed through state emergency management. Harrow County Temporal Anomaly Monitoring, Level 1 protocols. Dense government language with 3 lines that made my blood cold. Do not discuss time anomalies with the public. All field personnel to carry mechanical timepieces. Under no circumstances initiate IPAWS civil danger warning without federal authorization. A new template appeared in my IPAWS system that I hadn't created. Project Fulcrum Level 1 Observational. No description, no sender, origin listed as federal restricted. The first reality hole appeared on camera 12 at 2:47 a.m. Main Street looked normal, then suddenly became perfectly still. Not black, not static, just frozen. No cars, no wind-blown debris, no movement at all for 5.5 minutes while timestamps kept advancing. Then reality jumped forward, cars appearing mid-turn like someone had spliced film. 3 other cameras showed similar dead zones within the same window. Hal looked like he'd aged 10 years when I showed him the footage. "You ever heard of Project Fulcrum?" he asked quietly. "Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's what happens when time stops behaving. Small pockets used to pop up military bases, labs. One town in the 80s fell off the map for 72 seconds. People came back wrong. Then at 2:30 a.m. on a quiet Sunday night, every monitor flashed red simultaneously. No input detected. Time source lost. Everything came back, but my familiar IPAWS interface was gone, replaced by a white box. Project Fulcrum, emergency override with a 300-second countdown timer. I hadn't touched anything. The county radio net went dead silent. Then my phone screamed with that awful emergency alert tone, and the message that appeared made my hands shake. Emergency alert. Time is collapsing. Stay indoors. Do not look at analog or digital clocks. Do not attempt to measure time. This is not a test. The analog clock on the wall had stopped. Its second hand frozen halfway between ticks, suspended in midair like it couldn't decide whether to move forward or back. The emergency alert's harsh tone was still echoing in my skull when every monitor in the Emergency Coordination Center went dark for exactly 3 seconds, then flickered back to life, displaying the same impossible message I just authorized. Emergency alert, time is collapsing. Stay indoors. Do not look at analog or digital clocks. Do not attempt to measure time. This is not a test. My own system was broadcasting an alert I hadn't written, using protocols I didn't have access to. The IPAWS interface showed the message as Federally Authorized Project Fulcrum Override, with cryptographic signatures I'd never seen before. My black hoodie felt damp with sweat as I stared at authentication codes that shouldn't exist, watching my carefully maintained emergency system operate under someone else's control. The county radio net exploded with chatter, then died completely within 30 seconds. I caught fragments before the silence. Deputy Sarah Chen reporting impossible movement patterns on Maple Street. Fire Chief Rodriguez saying his truck's GPS was showing 3 different locations simultaneously, and Sheriff Hadley's voice cutting through static with clocks in the station all showing different times, some running backward. Then nothing but dead air across all channels, as if every radio in Harrow County had been switched off at once. My phone buzzed against the console. A text from an unknown number. Marcus Webb, Emergency Coordination Center. Temporal containment protocols now active. Report anomalies to Federal Coordinator. Do not leave facility. Agent S. Reeves, DHS Temporal Security Division. Before I could process the existence of a Temporal Security Division, a second message appeared with the same timestamp. Previous message compromised. Trust no federal contact. Facility is not secure. Evacuate immediately. Agent S. Reeves, DHSTSD. Both messages showed as arriving at 2:31:47, but I'd received them 15 seconds apart. My mechanical watch, the old wind-up my grandfather had given me, was ticking backward. The second hand moved counterclockwise in steady, deliberate clicks, while the digital clock on my console jumped forward in erratic bursts. 02:32, 02:35, 02:29, 02:41. Time wasn't just unstable, it was actively fighting itself. The Project Fulcrum PDF updated itself on my screen, new sections appearing as I watched. Level 2, Protocols Population Behavioral Analysis, contained a chilling subsection. Subjects exposed to temporal distortion exhibit progressive reality dissociation. Initial symptoms include time perception errors, followed by visual anomalies, then complete temporal displacement. Containment requires isolation from all chronometric devices. Under no circumstances, allow subjects to observe paradoxical events directly. Camera feeds throughout town showed the impossible becoming routine. The elementary school playground displayed children moving in perfect reverse, running backward up slides while their laughter played forward. At Murphy's Bar, I watched the same customer enter and exit simultaneously through the front door, creating a visual loop that made my eyes water to follow. Most disturbing was Camera 7 at the intersection of Main and Oak, where a traffic light cycled through red, yellow, and green in random sequences, while cars passed through in compliance with lights that hadn't changed yet. My console chimed with an incoming call on the emergency line. The caller ID showed Harrow County Sheriff, but the timestamp read 3:47:12, incoming from future. I answered anyway, my steel-toe boots scraping against the floor as I leaned forward. Sheriff Hadley's voice came through clear but wrong, like he was speaking through water. "Webb, this is Hadley. I'm calling from the station, but I'm also watching myself make this call from 20 minutes ago. The timeline is fracturing. Whatever you do, don't trust anyone who claims to be federal authority. They're not here to fix this. They're here to study it." "Sheriff, where are you right now?" I asked, but the line had already gone dead. On Camera 12, which monitored the sheriff's station parking lot, I could see Hadley's patrol car arriving, parking, and leaving in a continuous loop, with multiple versions of the sheriff visible simultaneously, each slightly out of phase with the others. The building's ventilation system changed pitch, cycling through sounds I'd never heard before. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe, and when I looked at my reflection in the black computer screen, my face seemed to lag behind my movements by half a second. I was becoming temporally unstable myself, just by being here, by witnessing what shouldn't be possible. A new window opened on my primary monitor without any input from me. Fulcrum Entity Detection, Proximity Alert. A schematic of the Emergency Coordination Center appeared, showing my location as a blue dot in the control room. Moving through the facility's corridors was a red dot labeled Temporal Anomaly Humanoid Classification. Paradox. According to the tracking system, something was walking through the building's hallways, something that registered as both present and absent, existing in a state of temporal contradiction. The internal security cameras showed empty corridors, but motion sensors indicated movement. Emergency lighting flickered in patterns that suggested someone passing beneath them, but no one was there. Then, on camera INT-04 monitoring the hallway outside my control room, I saw footsteps appearing in the dust on the floor. Not feet, just the impressions they left behind, materializing one by one as something invisible walked directly toward my door. The radio crackled back to life with Deputy Chen's voice, but she sounded exhausted, aged. "Webb, I've been on patrol for 3 hours, but my watch says it's been 12 minutes. The people in the houses, they're stuck in loops. The Morrison family has been eating the same dinner for what feels like hours, but they're aging with each repetition. Mrs. Morrison looks 20 years older than when I started watching. Time isn't just broken, Webb. It's feeding on people. Before I could respond, every light in the facility went out simultaneously. Emergency power kicked in after what felt like an eternity but was probably seconds, bathing everything in red. The analog clock I'd removed from the wall was now hanging in its original position, second hand moving normally, but the time it showed was 11:47 p.m., 3 hours before my shift had even started. The door to my control room opened slowly, though I hadn't heard the keycard reader activate. Standing in the doorway was a figure in a black hoodie, dark jeans, and steel-toe boots identical to mine. He looked like me, but older, more tired, with eyes that had seen too much. When he spoke, it was with my voice but carrying the weight of experiences I hadn't had yet. "You need to stop looking at the cameras, Marcus," he said, stepping into the room. "Every time you witness a paradox, you create another fracture. The entity feeds on temporal inconsistencies, and you've been serving it a feast." He gestured toward my monitors, where impossible scenes continued to play out across Harrow's Run. "In 43 minutes, you're going to make a choice that determines whether this town survives or becomes a permanent temporal scar. I'm here to make sure you choose correctly." Behind him, the hallway stretched impossibly long, filled with doors that led to rooms that couldn't exist in this building. And at the far end of that corridor, something vast and patient was moving toward us with the inevitability of time itself. The version of myself standing in the doorway moved with the careful precision of someone who had lived through trauma, his steel-toe boots making no sound on the concrete floor despite their obvious weight. His black hoodie was identical to mine but worn differently, faded in places that suggested months of use rather than the few weeks I'd owned this one. When he sat down in the chair across from my console, I noticed his hands bore scars I didn't have yet, thin white lines across his knuckles, and a burn mark on his left palm that looked like it came from grabbing something superheated. "You're going to want to see the classified files," he said, reaching toward my keyboard with movements that mirrored my own muscle memory. "Project Fulcrum isn't what they told you it was. I don't have time to convince you I'm you, but you're going to believe me when I tell you some things no one else knows. You were 12 when you watched your dad die in that maintenance shaft because a safety timer glitched low by 3 seconds. You've been obsessed with clocks ever since. You keep the broken one from that day in your closet, top shelf, back left. Masking tape on the lid says, 'Don't open.' You left a thumbprint in the dust on February 4th this year when you almost opened it and didn't." My mouth went dry because that was exactly right, down to the thumbprint I thought no one would ever know about. "That's what this is, Marcus. You trying to stop another 3-second glitch that kills a town instead of one man." New windows cascaded across my monitors as he accessed files buried deep in the federal database, documents stamped with clearance levels I'd never seen. Project Fulcrum wasn't created to monitor temporal anomalies. It was designed to create them. The first document that appeared made my blood run cold. Temporal WEAPONS Research Division, Project Fulcrum, Phase 1, Controlled Chronological Displacement Testing. The header showed a date from 1987, but the metadata indicated it had been modified as recently as last week. According to the summary, Harrow's Run had been selected as a test site because of its geographic isolation, stable population, and proximity to natural electromagnetic anomalies that could mask experimental signatures. What I'd thought was my job maintaining emergency systems was actually my role as an unwitting observer in a federal experiment designed to weaponize time itself. They needed someone inside the emergency coordination system. My future self continued, pulling up personnel files that showed my hiring wasn't coincidental. Someone with technical skills but no federal clearance, no connections that would ask uncomfortable questions. Someone expendable. Project Fulcrum Phase 2 documentation revealed the true horror: entity cultivation and harvesting protocols. The temporal distortions weren't side effects of an experiment gone wrong. They were deliberately created feeding opportunities for something the researchers referred to as the chronophage, a parasitic entity that existed outside normal spacetime and fed on temporal inconsistencies. "It's not from our dimension," my older self explained, highlighting sections that made my stomach turn. "It's a void, a hungry emptiness that lives in the gaps, in the inconsistencies, in the moments when time stutters and contradicts itself. Every time a clock shows two different times, every time an event happens out of sequence, every time a mind struggles to reconcile what it sees with what it knows should be, that's food for it. And the more it feeds, the stronger it gets, the more aggressively it manifests." The security cameras throughout the facility now showed the true extent of the contamination. The hallways I'd walked through for months were overlapping with versions of themselves from different time periods, existing simultaneously in multiple timeline states, and every person who worked here was being slowly consumed by the paradoxes we created just by being present. "The entity isn't contained to Harrow's Run anymore," my future self said grimly, pulling up satellite imagery that showed temporal distortion signatures spreading outward from the town in concentric circles. "In my timeline, it reached critical mass 43 minutes from now when you tried to shut down the IPAWS system. The shutdown created a massive temporal backlash that fed it enough energy to break free of the local area. Within 6 hours, the distortions had reached Seattle. Within 24 hours, the entire Pacific Northwest was trapped in temporal loops where people experience every moment of their lives simultaneously, aging and dying and being born over and over again, while the entity feeds on their temporal energy." He pulled up one final document: Project Fulcrum Termination Protocols, Emergency Containment Procedures. The solution was as horrifying as the problem: to stop the entity before it reached critical mass. Someone with administrative access would need to activate a temporal reset that would effectively erase Harrow's Run from the timeline, along with everything and everyone in it, creating a permanent temporal stasis field that would prevent spread but doom everyone inside to exist in a single frozen moment forever. "That's why I'm here," my older self said, standing up from the chair. "To make sure you understand the choice and to give you something they didn't model." He accessed another directory that flickered as if undecided about existing. Unauthorized field hacks unverified. The document opened on its own, showing plain text typed by someone desperate. "If you're reading this, they let your town run too long. The official protocol is to let it eat you. Don't. You can starve it by breaking your own timeline. If everything lines up too neatly, it has a clean surface to bite. Make your history messy, multiple versions of events, coexisting records, conflicting logs. Give it a false center by convincing it the collapse already happened elsewhere." My future self looked at me with haunted eyes. "There's a third option, but it requires you to do something that goes against every instinct you have as someone who maintains emergency systems. You have to break everything, every system, every protocol, every safeguard. Create chaos so complete that the entity can't distinguish between intentional paradoxes and system failures." The facility speakers crackled with a calm, authoritative voice. "Harrow County Emergency Coordination Center. This is Special Agent Samuel Reeves with DHS Temporal Security Division. We are on site. Marcus Webb, remain where you are. Do not power down any systems. Do not alter any logs. We're entering now." The intercom clock said 02:33. The IPAWS log put the same audio at 3:05, and my grandfather's watch ticked 11:59 with hands spinning freely. Future me's eyes went distant, listening to echoes I couldn't hear yet. This is where I screwed it up. I believed them, kept everything pristine so they could study it. You're going to want to listen when Reeves walks through that door. He'll sound like the only sane adult left. You need to lie to him about what time it is, about what already happened, what you saw, what you didn't. Make your story a minefield of contradictions, stamped and signed with your ID. The entity wants truth it can fold around. Give it conflicting truths. Heavy footsteps approached down the hall as my future self's outline started to fuzz at the edges like bad compression. When Reeves walks in, remember. Stop watching, break your own story, give the collapse somewhere else to go. And whatever you do, don't let him convince you this is just data. Agent Samuel Reeves looked exactly like every federal investigator you've ever seen on the news. Mid-40s, close-cropped dark hair streaked with gray, clean tactical jacket with a small, unobtrusive DHS patch, black pants, boots polished but practical. The only thing off was his eyes. They were tired in a way that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from seeing too many impossible things and having to pretend they made sense. He stepped into the control room like he'd been here before, like he already knew where every console and cable was positioned. Two men followed him, both in dark gear with no insignia, carrying cases that looked like oversized first aid kits but hummed softly with internal electronics. "Marcus Webb?" he asked, voice calm and measured. My own name sounded wrong in his mouth, like it belonged to someone else now. "Yeah," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady while my steel-toe boots scraped against the concrete floor. "You're Reeves." He flashed a badge that said DHS, Temporal Security Division, Special Agent SREVES, with too many layers of hologram for me to parse quickly. "We don't have much time. I need you to tell me everything you've observed since the first anomaly. Leave nothing out. Every paradox, every glitch, every strange report." Behind him, one of the techs opened his humming case and began setting up a device that looked like a ruggedized tablet connected to a nest of antennas and sensor rods. Its screen showed a 3D wireframe of the Emergency Coordination Center, with pulsing zones of red and orange where temporal distortion was strongest. The red was clustered right here, in my control room. A countdown timer in the corner read entity saturation threshold, 0, 41, 23, and was decreasing steadily. Future me's warning rang in my skull: you have to break everything. Make your story a minefield of contradictions. My entire career had been built on precise, accurate logging. Now I had to do the exact opposite, and do it convincingly enough that a man who'd clearly seen this before wouldn't immediately call me out. "It started earlier than I initially reported," I said, deliberately vague, watching Reeves's expression. "About 6 hours ago, when our primary NTP server began showing synchronization errors with GPS atomic time. The first visual distortion appeared on camera 12 at 21:15, showing Main Street frozen for exactly 8 minutes and 37 seconds. I paused, then contradicted myself. Actually, our backup systems logged the same event as lasting 3 minutes and occurring at 22:03. I'm not sure which timestamp to trust anymore." His eyes flicked toward the wall clock that said 11:47 p.m. and the digital dashboard that insisted it was 2:36 a.m. He didn't correct me, which meant he was either testing me or had already given up on trusting any time source in this building. "Describe the federal override," he said, pulling out his own tablet. I swallowed hard and began weaving the kind of story that would give the chronophage temporal indigestion. "The IPAWS alert pushed automatically at 2:30, but I have clear logs showing I initiated emergency protocols at 22:30 and sent a different alert at 23:15. The system shows federal override authorization that I never requested, but it's stamped with my security credentials from 3 different time periods." As I spoke, I was already pulling up my workstation, fingers flying across the keyboard to create the contradictions I was describing. I began systematically corrupting my own records, creating false entries that showed the same events happening at multiple times with different outcomes, each stamped with my security credentials to make them official. "Mr. Webb, your reports indicated a stable network for the past 3 months, Reeves said, his calm facade cracking slightly. No mention of temporal anomalies or federal overrides. He showed me a tablet displaying my own logs, pristine and orderly until an hour ago. We rely on accurate data. Your current assessment contradicts your previous entries. This was the moment of truth. I met his gaze directly, letting desperation creep into my voice. Agent Reeves, with all due respect, what I've been observing tonight makes my previous reports look like children's bedtime stories. My grandfather's watch is running backward. The console shows 3 different times simultaneously, and I've got camera feeds of the same patrol car existing in multiple locations at once. I held up my mechanical watch, its hands moving counterclockwise in steady clicks. Which timeline do I trust, sir? Because honestly, I'm starting to question whether any of this is real. Behind Reeves, the tech with the sensor array looked up with alarm. Sir, temporal shear is spiking around his workstation. We're reading multiple concurrent event stacks overlaid in the same spatial coordinates. The countdown timer showed 37:15. Whatever they were timing, we were running out of it fast. Reeves stepped closer to my console, his professional mask slipping to reveal something predatory underneath. Mr. Webb, Harrow's Run was selected for this research specifically because of its isolation and manageable population. The entity requires controlled feeding to reach full manifestation, and your town represents an ideal testing environment. The words hit me like a physical blow. Everyone I'd grown to care about over the past months was considered acceptable collateral damage in a federal experiment. You're studying it, I said, the pieces falling into place. You're not here to contain anything. You're here to collect data while it feeds. Reeves smiled, the expression cold and clinical. The chronophage represents a breakthrough in temporal manipulation technology. Once we understand its feeding patterns and growth cycles, we can potentially weaponize temporal distortion on a strategic scale. Your facility has provided invaluable data on entity cultivation protocols. The casual way he discussed my neighbor's deaths as data points made my hands shake with rage. But I forced myself to keep typing, keep corrupting, keep building the kind of temporal chaos that might choke the thing they'd unleashed on us. The facility's lights flickered as something massive moved through the building structure. On my security cameras, I could see impossible hallways spreading throughout the complex like an infection, corridors that led to rooms that couldn't exist in this building. The proximity alert showed multiple red dots now, moving through spaces that weren't there an hour ago. The entity is reaching critical mass ahead of schedule, Reeves observed, checking his tablet with scientific detachment. Your direct interaction with temporal distortions has accelerated its development beyond our models. He looked at me with the expression of someone who just realized their test subject was more valuable than expected. I'm going to need you to continue monitoring and reporting as the manifestation completes. Your unique position makes you an irreplaceable data source. That's when Agent Davies, the burly tech who'd been trying to access our network, let out a choked gasp. Where he'd been standing, a shimmering distortion hung in the air like heat haze but denser, darker. The air around it crackled with electricity, and the smell of ozone filled the room. The distortion pulsed, then solidified for a split second, revealing Davies stretched impossibly thin, his face contorted in a silent scream, his body pulled apart like taffy. Then it collapsed back into shimmering air, leaving only a damp stain on the floor and the coppery smell of blood. The proximity alert pulsed violently, then showed one fewer red dot. What the hell was that? The remaining tech whispered, backing toward the door. Reeves stared at the spot where his agent had been, his composure finally cracking. Temporal displacement, he said quietly. The entity consumed him across multiple timeline states simultaneously. He turned back to me, his eyes now showing genuine fear beneath the scientific fascination. Mr. Webb, we need to evacuate this facility immediately. The manifestation is occurring faster than our safety protocols can handle. I made my choice. "No," I said, my fingers still flying across the keyboard. "I'm not leaving and neither are you. You want data? I'll give you data." I pulled up every emergency alert in our system's database, every tornado warning, flash flood alert, and civil defense notification from the past 2 years, and began pushing them into the active queue with randomized timestamps. I corrupted the metadata, attributed them to non-existent federal agencies, and stamped each with contradictory authorization codes. The IPAWS system, designed for clarity and order, became a digital nightmare of conflicting information. "Stop," Reeves commanded, drawing his sidearm. "You're compromising a federal operation." But I could see the fear in his eyes as the countdown timer began flickering erratically. The chronophage was choking on the temporal noise I was feeding it, drowning in contradictions too chaotic for it to digest. "I'm not compromising anything," I said, reaching for the emergency system controls. "I'm giving your pet monster exactly what it deserves." I activated every emergency protocol simultaneously, triggered fire suppression and lockdown procedures, and initiated a facility-wide temporal reset that sent conflicting time signals to every device in the building. The room screamed, not audibly, electrically. Every monitor, every LED, every piece of equipment surged with power, lights flaring white before dropping to emergency red. The chronophage reacted like a wounded animal, and every reflective surface in the room shattered outward simultaneously, spraying us with glass that hung in the air far too long before falling. The countdown timer went haywire, jumping between numbers, displaying impossible values, finally settling on error. Temporal anchor lost. Through the external cameras, I watched Harrow's run flicker between different time states, but the loops were shorter now, less violent. People who'd been stuck repeating the same motions were completing them and moving on, confused but mobile. The red zones on Reeves's sensor tablet were no longer concentric circles but smeared streaks, like someone had dragged a finger through wet paint. The entity was losing cohesion, scattered across too many contradictory data points to maintain a stable feeding pattern. Reeves lowered his weapon, staring at the readings. "You didn't destroy it," he said quietly. "You dispersed it, gave it temporal indigestion." He looked at me with something like horrified respect. "The entity's signature is fragmenting, looking for a new anchor point, if it finds a stable timeline to latch onto." His voice trailed off as the implications hit him. In trying to save my town, I might have turned the rest of the country into fresh hunting grounds, but the facility was stabilizing. The analog clock on the wall settled its hands on 3, 2, and stayed there, ticking forward 1 second at a time like clocks are supposed to. My grandfather's watch began keeping pace. Outside, dawn was trying to decide whether it had already happened, the horizon pulsing between night and early light before choosing gray. Harrow's run was still here. So was I. So was the guilt coiling in my gut, because I knew I hadn't destroyed the thing that fed on time. I just convinced it to look elsewhere for its next meal. 6 months later, I still wake up at exactly 3:02 a.m. every single night. My body locked into that moment when the facility's analog clock finally decided what time it wanted to be and stayed there, ticking forward like clocks are supposed to. The studio apartment I rent in Spokane feels deliberately temporary, furnished with the kind of generic pieces you buy when you're not sure you'll be staying anywhere long enough to make it matter. My black hoodie hangs in the closet next to 2 identical replacements, because some habits become armor, and I'm not ready to change what kept me alive that night. The steel-toe work boots sit by the door, polished but barely used since I haven't worked a real job since Harrow's run disappeared from every map that matters. The official story, buried on page 6 of the Spokane Chronicle's regional section, described a catastrophic gas leak explosion at the Harrow County Emergency Coordination Center that killed 2 federal investigators and caused mass hallucinations throughout the surrounding area due to chemical contamination. The facility was sealed permanently, The population evacuated for their safety, and within 3 weeks, Harrow's Run had been administratively dissolved as a municipality. Search for it on Google Maps now, and you'll find empty forest with a notation reading, Geological Survey Area, Restricted Access. The 3,847 people who lived there were relocated across the Pacific Northwest, their medical records showing treatment for chemical exposure-related neurological symptoms. Their moving expenses covered by a FEMA disaster relief fund that doesn't appear in any public database I can access. I tried contacting other survivors during those first desperate weeks, but the phone numbers I'd memorized led to disconnected lines or people who claimed never to have heard of any town called Harrow's Run. Deputy Sarah Chen's personnel records show she transferred to a sheriff's department in eastern Oregon, but when I called, they insisted they'd never employed anyone by that name. Sheriff Hadley's pension is being paid to a James Hadley in Spokane who's been retired for 8 years and has no memory of ever working in emergency services. Either the federal cleanup was more thorough than I imagined, or the temporal distortions affected people's memories in ways that make my scatteredentity theory look optimistic. The only proof I have that any of it happened is the burned scar on my left palm from grabbing a superheated console during the facility's final moments, and my grandfather's mechanical watch that still runs exactly 3 seconds fast no matter how many times I try to adjust it. Agent Reeves disappeared completely. No federal employee by that name exists in DHS records. No temporal security division appears in any organizational chart. And when I tried filing complaints through official channels, I was politely informed that no federal agents had been deployed to Harrow County during the relevant time period. But I know it wasn't hallucination, because the entity I scattered didn't disappear. It relocated, fragmented, learned to hunt more carefully. Small stories buried in local news sections across the country tell the real tale. A nuclear facility in Arizona reporting minor timing system discrepancies that were quickly resolved by maintenance staff. A high school in Vermont where students claim they're living the same day repeatedly, but with subtle differences each time. A retirement home in Florida where residents age at different rates, some gaining years in days while others seem frozen in time. Each incident lasts only a few days before resolving, but the pattern is unmistakable to someone who knows what to look for. The chronophage is still out there, still hungry, but now it feeds in smaller doses, moving from place to place like a virus that's learned to avoid detection. My sabotage didn't kill it. I just taught it to be more careful, more distributed, harder to track. Instead of consuming one town completely, it takes sips from dozens of locations, never staying long enough to trigger federal attention, never feeding deeply enough to create obvious paradoxes that would expose its presence. I turned a localized disaster into a national infection, and the worst part is knowing it was probably the right choice. Agent Lewis calls once a month, always from a different number, always with the same questions disguised as follow-up counseling. Has I noticed any temporal anomalies? Any unusual experiences with clocks or timing systems? Any dreams about places I've never been? I tell him no, because the truth would put me back in a federal facility, and because I've learned that some lies protect more people than honesty ever could. What I don't tell him is that the dream started 3 months ago. Vivid experiences of being in emergency coordination centers across the country, watching impossible readings develop on systems I've never operated, in towns I've never visited. Last week I dreamed I was a security dispatcher at a power plant in Ohio, monitoring systems that showed temporal fluctuations, while something moved through corridors that stretched longer than the building's blueprints allowed. 2 nights ago, I was working emergency services in a small Texas town, receiving 911 calls from people who claimed to be calling from next Tuesday. The details change, but the pattern is consistent. Someone in my position, watching reality come apart at the seams, trying to make sense of systems that no longer follow their designed parameters. I think the entity marked me during our encounter, created a connection that lets it show me where it's feeding next. The dreams aren't random, they're reconnaissance, a way for me to observe its hunting patterns without being physically present. Sometimes I wake up with knowledge I shouldn't have, like knowing that the Vermont high school incident will resolve when the entity moves on to a small hospital in Montana, where the ICU clocks have started running backward. I've learned not to call in warnings, because interference makes the distortions worse rather than better. Instead, I document everything. Spreadsheets full of temporal anomaly reports, maps tracking the entity's movement patterns, timelines showing its feeding cycles. I've become an unpaid researcher studying a phenomenon that officially doesn't exist, building a database no one will ever see, but that might someday help someone else understand what we're dealing with. The entity is patient now, careful, but it's also learning. Each feeding makes it slightly stronger, slightly more sophisticated in its approach. My phone buzzes with a news alert. Technical issues resolved at Arizona nuclear facility. The article mentions routine maintenance on timing systems and no safety concerns, but I recognize the careful language that suggests something more significant happened. The entity is getting bolder, targeting more critical infrastructure. Nuclear facilities represent massive concentrations of precise timing systems, emergency protocols, and potential energy sources. If the chronophage has learned to feed on atomic clocks and reactor control systems, the implications are terrifying. I walk to the window, looking out at Spokane's skyline in the pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere out there, in Arizona or Montana or Vermont, someone is probably sitting at a console right now, watching their systems display impossible readings, wondering if they're losing their mind or if reality is coming apart. They're probably dedicated, the kind of person who chose emergency services to help people. They have no idea they're about to become ground zero for something that feeds on the gaps between what should happen and what does. My grandfather's watch ticks steadily on the nightstand, 3 seconds fast, counting time that might not exist tomorrow. The chronophage remembers me, and I can feel its attention sometimes, cold and patient and grateful. After all, I'm the one who taught it to hunt more efficiently, scattered it across thousands of potential feeding sites instead of containing it to one. In trying to save my town, I may have doomed my country. But Harrow's Run doesn't exist on any map, and 3,847 people are living new lives in new places, free from the thing that would have consumed them completely. Sometimes that has to be enough. Sometimes the best you can do is make sure the monster has to work harder for its next meal, even knowing you can't stop it from eating entirely. Time keeps moving forward, 1 second at a time, and I keep counting those seconds, waiting for the next dream, the next impossible phone call, the next chance to warn someone who won't believe me until it's too late. The chronophage is patient, but so am I, and eventually someone will listen.